Welcome to the Art of the Ancient Aegean. This audio presentation was created by Dr. Adam for the students of Stanton College Preparatory School.
Chapter 4 Art of the Ancient Aegean. This elegantly posed and sharply silhouetted girl, reaching to pluck the crocus flowers blooming on the hillside in front of her, offers us a window into life in the ancient Aegean world. The image is from a fresco of circa 1650 BCE, found in a house in Akrotiri, a town on the Aegean island of Thera, that was famous for the saffron harvested from its crocuses. Saffron was valued in the Bronze Age Aegean, mainly as a yellow dye in textile production, but it also had medicinal properties and was used to alleviate menstrual cramps. The latter use may be referenced in this image, since the fresco was part of the elaborate painted decoration of a room used for the coming-of-age ceremonies of young women at the onset of menses. The crocus gatherer's shaved head and looped long ponytail are attributes of childhood, but the light blue color of her scalp indicates that her hair is beginning to grow out, suggesting that she is entering adolescence. The house that contained this painting disappeared suddenly more than 3,600 years ago, when the volcano that formed the island of Thera erupted, spewing pumice that filled and sealed every crevice of Akrotiri, fortunately after the residents had fled. The rediscovery of the lost town in 1967 was among the most significant archaeological events of the second half of the 20th century, and excavation of the city is still underway. The opportunity that Thera affords archaeologists to study works of art and architecture in context has allowed for a deeper understanding of the Bronze Age cultures of the Aegean. As the image of the girl gathering crocuses illustrates, wall paintings may reflect the ritual uses of a room or building, and the meanings of artifacts are better understood by considering both where they are found and how they are grouped with one another. Before 3000 BCE, until about 1100 BCE, several Bronze Age cultures flourished simultaneously across the Aegean. On a cluster of small islands, including Thera, called the Cyclades, on Crete and other islands of the eastern Mediterranean, and on mainland Greece. To learn about these cultures, archaeologists have studied shipwrecks, homes, and grave sites, as well as the ruins of architectural complexes. Archaeology, uncovering and interpreting material culture to reconstruct its original context, is our principal means of understanding the Bronze Age culture of the Aegean, since only one of its 3 written languages has been decoded. In recent years, archaeologists and art historians have collaborated with researchers in such areas of study as the history of trade and the history of climate change to provide an ever clearer picture of ancient Aegean society. But many sites await excavation or even discovery. The history of the Bronze Age Aegean is still being written. Learn about it. Compare and contrast the art and architecture developed by 3 Aegean Bronze Age cultures. Evaluate how archaeology has recovered, reconstructed, and interpreted ancient Aegean material culture despite the lack of written documents. Assess the differences in the designs and use of the large architectural complexes created by the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. Investigate the relationship between art and social rituals or communal practices in the ancient Aegean cultures. In the Aegean. Discover the technical sophistication imported from Bronze Age Arabia and Anatolia. Aegean peoples created exquisite objects of bronze that were prized for export. This early period, when the manufacture of bronze tools and weapons became widespread, is known as the Aegean Bronze Age. For the ancient Aegean peoples, the sea provided an important link not only between the mainland and the islands, but also to the world beyond. In contrast to the landlocked civilizations of the Near East and to the Egyptians, who used river transportation, the peoples of the Aegean were seafarers, and their ports welcomed ships from other cultures around the Mediterranean. For this reason, shipwrecks offer a rich source of information about the material culture of these ancient societies. For example, the wreck of a trading vessel probably from the Levant, the Mediterranean coast of the Near East, thought to have sunk in or soon after 1306 BCE, and discovered in the vicinity of Uluburun, off the southern coast of modern Turkey, carried an extremely varied cargo: metal ingots, bronze weapons and tools, aromatic resins, fruits and spices, jewelry and beads, African ebony, ivory tusks, ostrich eggs, discs of blue glass ready to be melted down for reuse, and ceramics from the Near East, mainland Greece, and Cyprus. Among the gold objects was a scarab associated with Nefertiti, wife of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. The cargo suggests that this vessel cruised from port to port along the Aegean and eastern Mediterranean seas, loading and unloading goods as it went. It also suggests that the peoples of Egypt and the ancient Near East were important trading partners. Probably the thorniest problem in Aegean archaeology is that of dating the finds. In the case of the Uluburun wreck, the dating of a piece of freshly cut firewood on the ship to 1306 BCE, using a technique called dendrochronology that analyzes the spaces between growth rings, allowed unusual precision in pinpointing the moment this ship sunk. But archaeologists are not always able to find such easily datable materials. They usually rely on a relative dating system for the Aegean Bronze Age, based largely on pottery. But using it to assign specific dates to sites and objects is complicated and controversial. One cataclysmic event has helped. A huge volcanic explosion on the Cycladic island of Thera, as we have seen, devastated Minoan civilization there and on Crete, only 70 miles to the south. Evidence from tree rings from Ireland and California and traces of volcanic ash in ice cores from Greenland put the date of the eruption about 1650 to 1625 BCE. Sometimes in this book, you will find periods cited without attached dates, and in other books, you may encounter different dates from those given for objects shown here. You should expect dating to change in the future as our knowledge grows and new techniques of dating emerge. The Cycladic Islands. On the Cycladic Islands, late Neolithic and early Bronze Age people developed a thriving culture. They engaged in agriculture, herding, crafts, and trade, using local stone to build fortified towns and hillside burial chambers. Because they left no written records, their artifacts are our principal source of information about them. From about 6000 BCE, Cycladic artists used a coarse, poor-quality local clay to make a variety of ceramic objects, including engaging ceramic figurines of humans and animals, as well as domestic and ceremonial wares. Some 3,000 years later, they began to produce marble sculptures. The Cyclades, especially the islands of Naxos and Paros, had ample supplies of a fine and durable white marble. Sculptors used this stone to create sleek, abstracted representations of human figures, ranging from a few inches to almost 5 feet tall. They were shaped, perhaps by women, with scrapers made of obsidian and smoothed by polishing stones of emery, both materials easily available on the Cyclades. These sculptures have been found almost exclusively in graves, and although there are a few surviving male figures, the overwhelming majority represent nude women and conform to a consistent representational convention. They are presented in extended poses of strict symmetry, with arms folded just under the gently protruding breasts, as if they were clutching their abdomens. Necks are long, heads tilted back, and faces are featureless except for a prominent, elongated nose. All body parts are pared down to essentials, and some joints and junctures are indicated with incised lines. The sculptors carefully designed these figures, laying them out with a compass in conformity to 3 evenly spaced and equally sized circles. The first delineated by the upper arch of the head and the waist, the second by the sloping shoulders and the line of the knees, and the third beginning with the curving limit of the paired feet and meeting the bottom of the upper circle at the waist. For us, These elegant pure stylizations recall the modern work of sculptors like Brancusi, but originally their smooth marble surfaces were enlivened by painted motifs in blue, red, and more rarely green paint, emphasizing their surfaces rather than their three-dimensional shapes. Today, evidence of such painting is extremely faint, but many patterns have been recovered using controlled lighting and microscopic investigation. Unlike the forms themselves, the painted features are often asymmetrical in organization. In the example illustrated here, wide-open eyes appear on forehead, cheeks, and thigh, as well as on either side of the nose. Art historians have proposed a variety of explanations for the meaning of these painted motifs. The angled lines on some figures' bodies could bear witness to the way Cycladic peoples decorated their own bodies, whether permanently with tattoos or scarification, or temporarily with body paint, applied either during their lifetimes or to prepare their bodies for burial. The staring eyes, which seem to demand the viewer's return gaze, may have been a way of connecting these sculpted images to those who owned or used them. And eyes on locations other than faces may aim to draw viewers' attention, perhaps even healing powers, to a particular area of the body. Some have associated eyes on bellies with pregnancy. Art historian Gail Hoffman has argued that patterns of vertical red lines painted on the faces of some figures were related to Cycladic rituals of mourning their dead. Perhaps these sculptures were used in relation to a succession of key moments throughout their owners' lifetimes, such as puberty, marriage, and death, and were continually repainted with motifs associated with each ritual, before finally following their owners into their graves at death. Since there is no written evidence from Cycladic culture, it is difficult to be certain. But these sculptures were clearly important to Bronze Age Cycladic peoples and seem to have taken on meaning in relationship to their use. Although some Cycladic islands retained their distinctive artistic traditions, by the Middle and later Bronze Age, the art and culture of the Cyclades as a whole was subsumed by Minoan and later Mycenaean culture. The Minoan civilization on Crete. By 3000 BCE, Bronze Age people were living on Crete, the largest of the Aegean islands, 155 miles long and 36 miles wide. Crete was economically self-sufficient, producing its own grains, olives and other fruits, and cattle and sheep. With many safe harbors and a convenient location, Crete became a wealthy sea power, trading with mainland Greece, Egypt, the Near East, and Anatolia, thus acquiring the ores necessary for producing bronze. Between about 1900 BCE and 1375 BCE, a distinctive culture flourished on Crete. The British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans named it Minoan after the legend of Minos, a king who had ruled from the capital Knossos. According to this legend, a half-man, half-bull monster called the Minotaur, son of the wife of King Minos and a bull belonging to the sea god Poseidon, lived at Knossos in a maze called the Labyrinth. To satisfy the Minotaur's appetite for human flesh, King Minos ordered the mainland kingdom of Athens to send a yearly tribute of 14 young men and women, a practice that ended when the Athenian hero Theseus killed the beast. Minoan chronology is divided into two main periods: the Old Palace period, from about 1900 to 1700 BCE, and the New Palace period, from around 1700 to 1450 BCE. The Old Palace period, circa 1900 to 1700 BCE. Minoan civilization remained very much a mystery until 1900 CE, when Sir Arthur Evans began uncovering the buried ruins of the architectural complex at Knossos on Crete's north coast that had been occupied by the Neolithic period, then built over with a succession of Bronze Age structures. Architectural complexes. Like 19th century excavators before him, Evans called these great architectural complexes palaces. He believed they were occupied by a succession of kings. While some scholars continue to believe that Evan's palaces actually were the residences and administrative centers of hereditary rulers, the evidence has suggested to others that Minoan society was not ruled by kings drawn from a royal family, but by a confederation of aristocrats or aristocratic families who established a fluid and evolving power hierarchy. In this light, some scholars interpret these elaborate complexes not primarily as residences, but as sites of periodic religious ceremony or ritual, perhaps enacted by a community that gathered within the courtyards that are their core architectural feature. The walls of early Minoan buildings were made of rubble and mud bricks, faced with cut and finished local stone, our first evidence of dressed stone used as a building material in the Aegean. Columns and other interior elements were made of wood. Both in large complexes and in the surrounding towns, timber appears to have been used for framing and bracing walls. Its strength and flexibility would have minimized damage from the earthquakes common to the area. Nevertheless, the earthquake at the time of the Thera eruption damaged several sites, including Knossos and Phaistos. Damaged structures were repaired and enlarged, and the resulting new complexes shared a number of features. Multi-storied, flat-roofed, and with many columns, they were designed to maximize light and air, as well as to define access and circulation patterns. Daylight and fresh air entered through staggered levels, open stairwells, and strategically placed air shafts and light wells. Courtyards, not audience halls or temples, were the central and most prominent components of these rectangular complexes. Suites of rooms were arranged around them. Corridors and staircases led from courtyard to courtyard through apartments, ritual areas, and storerooms. Walls were coated with plaster, and some were painted with murals. Floors were plaster or plaster mixed with pebbles, stone, wood, or beaten earth. The residential quarters had many luxuries: sunlit courtyards or light wells, richly colored murals, and sophisticated plumbing systems. Workshops, clustered around the complexes, formed commercial centers. Storeroom walls were lined with enormous clay jars for oil and wine, and in their floors, store-lined pits from earlier structures had been designed for the storage of grain. The huge scale of the centralized management of foodstuffs became apparent when excavators at Knossos found in a single, although more recent storeroom, enough ceramic jars to hold 20,000 gallons of olive oil. Ceramic arts. During the Old Palace period, Minoans developed elegant new types of ceramics, spurred in part by the introduction of the potter's wheel early in the 2nd millennium BCE. One type is called Kamaris ware, after the cave on Mount Ida overlooking the architectural complex at Phaistos in southern Crete, where it was first discovered. The hallmarks of this select ceramic ware, so sought after that it was exported as far away as Egypt and Syria, were its extreme thinness, its use of color, and its graceful, stylized painted decoration. An example from about 2000 to 1900 BCE has a globular body and a beaked pouring spout. Created from brown, red, and creamy white pigments on a black body, the bold, curving forms, derived from plant life, that decorate this jug seem to swell with its bulging contours. Metalwork. Matching Kamaris ware in sophistication is early Minoan gold work. By about 1700 BCE, Aegean metalworkers were producing objects rivaling those of Near Eastern and Egyptian jewelers, whose techniques they may have learned and adopted. For a pendant in gold found at Chrysolakos, the artist arched a pair of easily recognizable but geometrically stylized bees, or perhaps wasps, around a honeycomb of gold granules, providing their sleek bodies with a single pair of outspread wings. The pendant hangs from a spider-like filigree form, with what appear to be long legs encircling a tiny gold ball. Small discs dangle from the ends of the wings and the point where the insects' bodies meet. The New Palace period, circa 1700 to 1450 BCE. The early architectural complex at Knossos, erected about 1900 BCE, formed the core of an elaborate new one built after the Thera eruption in circa 1650 to 1625 BCE. This rebuilding, at Knossos and elsewhere, belonged to the period termed New Palace by scholars, many of whom consider it the highest point of Minoan civilization. In its heyday, the Knossos complex covered 6 acres. The labyrinth at Knossos. Because double-axe motifs were used in its architectural decoration, the Knossos Palace was referred to in Greek legends as the labyrinth, meaning the house of the double axes, Greek labris, meaning double axe. The organization of the complex seemed so complicated that the word labyrinth eventually came to mean maze and became part of the Minotaur legend. This complicated layout provided the complex with its own internal security system, a baffling array of doors leading to unfamiliar rooms, stairs, yet more corridors, or even dead ends. Admittance could be denied by blocking corridors, and some rooms were accessible only from upper terraces. Close analysis, however, shows that the builders had laid out a square grid following predetermined principles, and that the apparently confusing layout may partially be the result of earthquake destruction and rebuilding over the centuries. In typical Minoan fashion, the rebuilt Knossos complex was organized around a large central courtyard. A few steps led from the central courtyard down into the so-called throne room to the west, and a great staircase on the east side descended to the Hall of the Double Axes, an unusually grand example of a Minoan hall. Evans gave the rooms their misleading but romantic names. This hall and others were supported by the uniquely Minoan-type wooden columns that became standard in Aegean palace architecture. The tree trunks from which the columns were made were inverted so that they tapered toward the bottom. The top, supporting massive roof beams and a broad flattened capital, was wider than the bottom. Rooms, following earlier tradition, were arranged around a central space rather than along an axis, as we have seen in Egypt and will see in mainland Greece. During the New Palace period, suites functioned as archives, business centers, and residences. Some must also have had a religious function, though the temples, shrines, and elaborate tombs seen in Egypt are not found in Minoan architecture. Bull leaping at Knossos. Minoan painters worked on a large scale, covering entire walls of rooms with geometric borders, views of nature, and scenes of human activity. Murals can be painted on a still wet plaster surface, buon fresco, or on a dry one, fresco secco. The wet technique binds pigments to the wall, but forces the painter to work very quickly. On a dry wall, the painter need not hurry, but the pigments tend to flake off over time. Minoans used both techniques. Minoan wall painting displays elegant drawing and, like Egyptian painters, Minoan painters filled these linear contours with bright and unshaded fields of pure color. They preferred profile or full-faced views, and they turned natural forms into decorative patterns through stylization. One of the most famous and best-preserved paintings of Knossos depicts one of the most prominent subjects in Minoan art, bull leaping. The restored panel is one of a group of paintings with bulls as subjects from a room in the east wing of the complex. The action, perhaps representing an initiation or fertility ritual, shows 3 scantily clad youths around a gigantic dappled bull, which is charging in the flying gallop pose. The pale-skinned person at the right, her paleness, probably identifying her as a woman, is prepared to catch the dark-skinned man in the midst of his leap, and the pale-skinned woman at the left grasps the bull by its horns, perhaps to help steady it, or perhaps preparing to begin her own vault. Framing the action are strips of overlapping shapes filled with ornament set within striped bands. The Woman with Snakes. Surviving Minoan sculpture consists mainly of small, finely executed work in wood, ivory, precious metals, stone, and faience, or colorfully glazed fine ceramic. Female figurines holding serpents are among the most characteristic images and may have been associated with water, regenerative power, and protection of the home. The woman or goddess with snakes is intriguing both as a ritual object and as a work of art. This faience figurine was found with other ceremonial objects in a pit in one of Knossos' storerooms. Bare-breasted, arms extended, and brandishing a snake in each hand, the woman is a commanding presence. Her shapely figure is dressed in a fitted, open bodice with an apron over a typically Minoan flounce skirt. A wide belt cinches the waist. The red, blue, and green geometric patterning on her clothing reflects the Minoan weaver's preference for bright colors, patterns, and fancy borders. Lifelike elements combine with formal stylization to create a figure that is both lively and dauntingly, almost hypnotically powerful, a combination that has led scholars to disagree whether statues such as this one represent deities or their human attendants. Stone rhytons. Almost certainly of ritual significance are a series of stone rhytons, vessels used for pouring liquids, that Minoans carved from steatite, a greenish or brown soapstone. These have been found in fragments and reconstructed by archaeologists. The harvester rhyton was a cone-shaped vessel, only the upper part is preserved, barely 4½ inches in diameter. It may have been covered with gold leaf, sheets of hammered gold. A rowdy procession of 27 men has been crowded onto its curving surface. The piece is exceptional for the freedom with which the figures occupy three-dimensional space, overlapping and jostling one another instead of marching in orderly, patterned, single file across the surface in the manner of some Near Eastern or Egyptian art. The exuberance of this scene is especially notable in the emotions expressed on the men's faces. They march and chant to the beat of a sistrum, a rattle-like percussion instrument, elevated in the hands of a man whose wide-open mouth seems to signal singing at the top of his lungs. The men have large, bold features and sinewy bodies so trim we can see their ribs. One man stands out from the crowd because of his long hair, scale-covered ceremonial cloak, and commanding staff. Is he the leader of this enthusiastic band, or is he following along behind them? Archaeologists have proposed a variety of interpretations for the scene: a spring planting or fall harvesting festival, a religious procession, a dance, a crowd of warriors, or a gang of forced laborers. As we have seen, bulls are a recurrent theme in Minoan art, and rhytons were also made in the form of a bull's head. The sculptor carved this one from a block of greenish-black steatite to create an image that approaches animal portraiture. Lightly engraved lines, filled with white powder to make them visible, enliven the animal's coat. Short, curly hair on top of the head, longer, shaggy strands on the sides, and circular patterns along the neck suggest its dappled coloring. White bands of shell outline the nostrils, and painted rock crystal and red jasper form the eyes. The horns, here restored, were made of wood covered with gold leaf. This rhyton was filled with liquid from a hole in the bull's neck, and during ritual libations, fluid flowed out from its mouth. Ceramic arts. The ceramic arts, so splendidly realized early on in Kamaris ware, were continued throughout the New Palace period. Some of the most striking ceramics were done in what is called the marine style, because of the depictions of sea life on their surfaces. In a stoppered bottle of this style, known as the octopus flask, made about 1500 to 1450 BCE, the painter created a dynamic arrangement of marine life in seeming celebration of Minoan maritime prowess. Like microscopic life teeming in a drop of pond water, sea creatures float around an octopus's tangled tentacles. The decoration on the Kamarisware jug had reinforced the solidity of its surface, but here the pottery skin seems to dissolve. The painter captured the grace and energy of natural forms while presenting them as a stylized design in calculated harmony with the vessel's bulging shape. Metalwork. About 1450 BCE, a conquering people from mainland Greece, known as the Mycenaeans, arrived in Crete. They occupied the buildings at Knossos and elsewhere until a final catastrophe and the destruction of Knossos about 1375 BCE caused them to abandon the site. But by 1400 BCE, the center of political and cultural power in the Aegean had shifted to mainland Greece. The skills of Minoan artists, particularly metalsmiths, made them highly sought after on the mainland. A pair of magnificent gold cups, found in a large tomb at Vaphio, on the Greek mainland south of Sparta, were made sometime between 1650 and 1450 BCE, either by Minoan artists or by locals trained in Minoan style and techniques. One side of one cup is shown here. The relief designs were executed in repoussé, the technique of pushing up the metal from the back of the sheet. The handles were attached with rivets, and the cup was then lined with sheet gold. In the scene circling the cup, the men are depicted trying to capture bulls in various ways. Here, a scantily clad man has roped a bull's hind leg. The figures dominate the landscape and bulge from the surface with a muscular vitality that belies the cup's small size. It is only 4.5 inches tall. The depiction of olive trees could indicate that the scene is set in a sacred grove. Could the cups illustrate exploits in some long-lost heroic tale, or are they commonplace herding scenes? Wall painting at Akrotiri on Thera. Minoan cultural influences seem to have spread to both the Cyclades and mainland Greece. Thera, for example, was so heavily under Crete's influence in the New Palace period that it was a veritable outpost of Minoan culture. A girl picking crocuses in a fresco in a house at Akrotiri wears the typically colorful Minoan flounced skirt with a short-sleeved, open-breasted bodice, large earrings, and bracelets. This wall painting demonstrates the sophisticated decorative sense found in Minoan art, both in color selection and in surface detail. The room in which this painting appears seems to have been dedicated to young women's coming-of-age ceremonies, and its frescoes provide the visual context for ritual activity, just like the courtyard of the architectural complexes in Crete. In another Akrotiri house, an artist has created an imaginative landscape of hills, rocks, and flowers, the first pure landscape painting we have encountered in ancient art. A viewer, standing in the center of the room, is surrounded by orange, rose, and blue rocky hillocks sprouting oversized, deep red lilies. Swallows, sketched by a few deft lines, swoop above and around the flowers. The artist unifies the rhythmic flow of the undulating landscape, the stylized patterning imposed on the natural forms, and the decorative use of bright colors alternating with darker, neutral tones, which were perhaps meant to represent areas of shadow. The colors may seem fanciful to us, but sailors today, who know the area well, attest to their accuracy, suggesting that these artists recorded the actual colors of Thera's wet rocks in the sunshine, a zestful celebration of the natural world. How different this is from the cool, stable elegance of Egyptian wall painting. The impact of Mycenaean culture is evident as well in Thera, and is especially notable in the martial flavor of a long strip of wall painting known as the flotilla fresco. The flotilla fresco appeared along the tops of the walls in the room of a house in Akrotiri comparable to that which contained the fresco of the girl gathering crocuses.
Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.